Not all barbecue fires are liquid propane. We have had some natural gas fires as well. Although the slides don't cover natural gas, we will talk about just briefly how to shut down and safely deal with some of the natural gas barbecues that you might run into. We'll talk about the typical types of barbecue fires, being a cylinder fire, being the propane hose, and sometimes just grease fires on the barbecue where the contents hasn't been maintained properly. And we'll talk about firefighting guidelines when fighting barbecue fires and keeping ourselves safe. We'll talk about transition attacks with the firefighting, and we'll go out and do a hands-on exercise outside. So that's the intent of today's training. You can see on the slide there we have the barbecue behind it. We've set up an exposure wall. We're going to be using that exposure wall today, and we're going to be using the barbecue for our evolutions. And the barbecue also has a vent off the top of the tank to simulate a valve fire. NFPA 1001 control a flammable cylinder gas fire. So when we're setting up training, we look at NFPA standards. One of the things prior to advancing is identifying some safe areas. So you roll up on the scene, you know you've got a barbecue fire, it's venting, officer goes in and does this 360, takes a look, what's the hazards, right? Identifying what's burning, communicating that to the incoming crews, looking at areas where you can come in with your attack lines. So can you come in from a corner of the house? Can you shield yourself behind a garden shed? You know, can you get somewhere where you're not in the area? If that tank does let go, you've got some protection. So obviously we want to get water on the tank as quick as possible and start cooling the tank. Now, 90% of the time when I've showed up with a barbecue fire, the tank's venting. The tank has already got to the point where the vent has let go and it's venting, or the regulator hose has burned off and you got a large volume of fire because it's just coming out of the valve of the tank at that point in time. So maintain crew integrity. I know we come from a variety of different sizes of fire department. I experience it all in my department too. Sometimes you go out with 4 on an engine, sometimes you go out with 2 on an engine. And crew integrity, working together. Let's at least have a couple of guys on the hand line. We're going to show you a technique today that involves 2 hand lines and a variety of people. You're going to have to think about additional resources, paging out a second station, you know, working safely. I can't stress that enough. The cylinder contents, obviously it should be propane, but what size of cylinder are you dealing with? You know, I have seen people do a variety of different things. We've seen 100-pounders on decks running stuff. So what size of cylinder are you dealing with? Obviously it has an impact. Close all valves that are open. Can you close that valve? Has that valve been damaged? If you can't close the valve and you extinguish the fire, you're creating a worse problem for yourself. So, you know, what conditions are in. We're going to have to evaluate the valve and evaluate the tank. Flames are not extinguished unless leaking gas is eliminated. That's what I said before. We don't want to cause that secondary explosion because it finds an ignition source. Something's still hot. You know, we're better off to let it burn, cool the cylinder, and protect the exposures. Cylinder is faced during approach and retreat. So let's keep an eye on what's going on out there. Let's not turn our back to the cylinder, turn our back to the barbecue. When we're advancing, back foot forward, front foot forward, back foot forward, and then going back the opposite way. Back with this foot, bring it forward again, back, back. And we'll practice advancing in that manner so that we're doing it in a safe manner so we don't trip over the hose, trip over your partner, a coordinated approach. Recognize hazards, conditions, and react. You know, how long has the fire been burning? Do you have direct flame impingement on that tank? Do you have the ability to cool that? Like, what's your water supply? You know, some of us show up with tankers. You know, some of us, the tanker may have not left the station because we don't have manpower. What's our ability to deal with the situation? Situational awareness and keeping ourselves safe. Properties of liquid gas petroleum. Propane is a gas that can be readily stored and transported liquid under pressure. It's colorless, odorless, tasteless. It does have an odor added to it, so we can smell propane, the mercaptan. Under normal temperatures, liquefied gas, the propane expands 270 times to 1. I had a 1,000-gallon propane tank this year in February. The farmer was clearing snow and pierced it in the liquid level with a fork. So fortunately enough, the liquid, when it escapes, is to the point of where it will freeze and cause frost. And we were able to take hot or wet cloths and rags, put it in that hole, and create a patch. And then because it was leaking liquid, we were still able to put water over the patch, just dribble some water down the tank, and actually creates a frost patch on the tank and stops the leak. So knowing the properties of the propane is very, very important, and knowing that the liquid coming out is in such a cold state it will freeze is important too. But keeping in mind that 270 times to 1 expansion rate, if you have vapor leaking and or you get to the point where you're having a levee, you have a significant amount of fire coming out. Liquid propane gas are not toxic, but present an inhalation hazard. Hazards with the gas, we will be wearing our SCBA. We're not going to enter a dangerous environment without that. We wouldn't want it to ignite and create burns for us. So full PPE, full SCBA when you're attacking these types of fire. Specific gravity of propane at 60 degrees is 0.504, roughly half the weight of water. Liquid propane will float on water. Vapor density of propane at 60 degrees, 1.5, roughly 1.5 times heavier than air, and it will sink to lower levels. Why is that important, guys? Basements, cooled pockets, underground parking. So some things, we're talking about barbecue fires, but some things to think about. Car fires, right? If the car has a propane system, an underground parking garage, if it has a leak or something, could find an ignition source. Propane vehicles inside garages when you respond to residential fires. If you've got a leak, garage door opener, sparks, stuff like that can create an explosion. Storage of propane tanks. Never in the residence, never in the basements. You're doing your home inspection programs, right? You're going to find them down there. People just don't think that, even the little propane ones for your camping stoves and stuff, right? People don't think that it will find that pilot light, that ignition source in the basement. Because it's heavier than air, it's going down there, it's going to find the ignition source. So we tell everyone, propane tanks outside, chained to a tree, in a garden shed, stuff like that. So flammable range, LEL, at 2.15%, it's too lean, it will not burn, and at 9.60% is too rich. And we could use that with our 4-gas detector. We can determine what the explosive range is to check for flammability ranges if we did have a leak. Ignition temperature, 490 degrees to 604 degrees is the ignition temperatures of propane. So 3 types of fires. The common maintenance one is the grease fire, and sometimes this causes a secondary fire. Mrs. Smith has used our barbecue, they haven't burned it off afterwards, and it gets caked up with grease. You actually even see some of this in our commercial kitchens and stuff where poor maintenance on the grill tops and stuff. Generally speaking, these are easy to handle fires. A dry chemical extinguisher we can use to put that fire out. Know your SOPs of dealing with exposures, so from your own department. So the second type is the connector hose to the regulator fire. Fires involving hoses to the barbecue. Hopefully at this point in time we can still control the propane flow, that hasn't damaged the valve, that you can shut off the valve. Any hole in a hose that creates a leak generally will ignite. If you've got liquid or if you've got vapor propane leaking out of any portion of that hose, generally the vapor will find an ignition source from the main burner and will ignite. The older style barbecues, anybody have the, not the new ones with the more coarse thread, but the older ones that had the fine thread on them? You remember how they had the O-ring on the back end of the regulator? The O-rings over time deteriorated, got cracks in them, and people are not good at maintaining their barbecues. So you got the cracks in the O-ring, you get propane leaking, and you'll get a leak between the regulator and the tank valve, and there's an ignition source right there, right? The other thing was, somebody comes back on the older style one and they don't crank it tight enough, you got that same leak because they didn't check, they didn't leak test it. So, invite, when you're doing your public education programs, have people leak test, use soap and water to leak test and see if they've got any leaks in their barbecues. Slow burning flame observed at first, and generally speaking, just by shutting off with a gloved hand, shutting off the tank, you can shut the tank off, eliminates the propane, and extinguish the burning hose with an extinguisher. So pretty simple fire to extinguish if you catch it early enough. Once it goes to the next stage, you're not extinguishing it that easy. Fire from the cylinder valve. So this is when we've had, most of us, when we're paged out, 4 minutes to get to the hall, a couple of minutes to get that truck on the road, 5 minutes to get to the scene sort of thing, depending where it is. This has been burning for a period of time. The regulator's burned off. You might have had some flame impingement on the tank. The propane in the tank's starting to heat, and you've got the valve that's venting out of the backside of the valve. Everyone know where the relief valves are on these tanks? They're generally on the backside of the handle. So you've got your front connector, and on the backside of the connector, you've got your relief valve. So you'll have propane venting from the backside. Once the tank starts to overpressure, it will vent. It says on this it sounds like a jet engine. I think that might be a little strong wording. It will be a loud sound. Definitely on the bigger tanks, it will be a jet engine sound. And you'll see that straight flame straight up off the back of the tank. It's 4, 5, 6 feet up in the air. You're going to get a fair flame off the backside of the tank. So secure a water source. You're the first in engine. I want to see 2 45 mil hand lines off that engine. Make sure you got enough line to get around the back of the property. Yes, sometimes we've said we have a manpower issue. Second station, additional resources. Some of you don't have that luxury. Then safety first, right? Can you attack it from a safe location? Stay back and let it vent. Can you protect the exposure? Just protect yourselves first, right? So 2 lines off. If we're fortunate enough to be in an area we have hydrants, let's grab a hydrant on the way in there. Again, manpower permitting, maybe second engine has to grab the hydrant. If not, let's think about water supply. Our tanker operations, we definitely want a tanker or a few tankers on the way because it may go into an exposure fire. Let's get that porta tank set up and get that water supply established. And I know we may not be able to do it initially, but let's just think as the officers and as the firefighters, let's just think those steps ahead so we've got a water supply secured. So we got our water supply established. We bled off our hose lines. We're ready to attack. We got full PPE on and SCBA. We're ready to go in and attack this. We're going to start by cooling the tank. We're going to go, and the next slide will go on to how we're going to do that. But the most important thing is cool the vapor space in the tank. Let's get some water on the tank first, and let's consider, with that second line, exposures. Levy, boiling liquid, expanding vapor, explosion. Very, very dangerous situation. Something we must be very cautious and very aware of. So we have the liquid in the tank. On the bottom, you have your liquid. You have the vapor space. And as fire impinges on the liquid, it heats the liquid. The liquid starts to want to expand. It's held within that vessel. You've got a lot of pressure and force on the sides of the vessel here from the force. and it causes the vessel to rupture at some point in time. Now obviously, if the flame impingement is on the liquid side down here and it's heating the liquid, it's going to take a little bit more time to heat the liquid than if the flame impingement was up here in the vapor side. The tank can obviously fail faster up on the vapor side than down on the liquid side. So generally speaking, when your regulator hose or you have a failure at the valve, you've got more damage or more susceptibility up in the vapor side, because obviously I think they only fill these things to about 70%. So, you know, officers, as you're doing your size up on a regular basis, doesn't matter whether it's a garage fire, residential fire, you know, we're talking barbecue fires today. You know, if you show up at a fire, you know, let's get a hold of that owner and ask him what's in that structure, because even if you have a fire, you know, and someone has a garden shed fire, you know, do they have a propane tank in there? Let's find out what we're dealing with. So, firefighting barbecue fires, cool the vapor space of the tank. If there's impingement for several minutes prior to approaching, do not extinguish the fire while cooling the tank, because we know we can't shut it off. Do not overturn the cylinder with your hose stream. Keep in mind, some of those cylinders sit in brackets in the bottom that, you know, the cylinder's sort of balanced in there and it's just friction fit. Others have a little bracket on the top. You know, you've had a fair bit of fire going. Has that bracket melted off? If you get too close with a 45 mil hose line, are you going to knock the tank over? So, you know, cooling the tank but not knocking it over. If you knock the tank over and it's venting, you could have liquid propane now coming out of the vent instead of vapor. And if you're on top of a deck, a wooden deck, the liquid propane is going to go down below the deck. You're going to have fire coming up and you're creating another exposure problem. So let's keep the tank in the upright position. Let's not knock it over. Protect ourselves. I talked 45 millimeter hose stream. I like to see 150 gallons a minute where we can off that hose stream. Enough water that you're going to protect yourselves. You can go down to the 95 GPM. For those who need rural water supply. But I want to see a 30-degree fog pattern so that you have that fog pattern to protect yourselves. So if the tank lets go or you get some vapor, you know, you do have that fog pattern that's going to protect you guys as the operators of the hose stream. Always operate in a perpendicular, straight up and down motion to the tank and the relief valve. Increased pressure may cause the relief to discharge. And again, if the relief valve isn't discharging and it does activate, you notice the relief valve's activating. Let's keep cooling that tank. Let's get that temperature down. As you saw in the video, when you did remove the flame, the relief valve did shut off. So if you can cool the tank enough, it may allow the relief valve to shut off, but in some cases the relief valve has popped and stayed open and it's not going to close. Liquid propane is heavier in air. So if we have liquid, it can go below the deck, just a reminder of that. Proper cooling should stop the possibility of the BBQ. So once we get the water on the tank, we should have eliminated that problem because of the volumes of water we're flowing. In most cases, easiest and safest to allow the liquid propane to burn off while cooling the tank. Exposures are always a concern. I mentioned the two fires I had gone to. The porch, rolled up onto the porch and up the side of the house and into the attic. Quite an exposure problem. In the other case, it went through the back patio doors and into the house and the main floor. Secure your water sources. The building wall, the deck. I've seen wooden decks on fire from this. So we're going to have to think about, even today when we're out there, we're going to be looking at exposures. We're going to use a TIC camera to check the wall for temperature. We're going to use a TIC camera to check for extension into the wall. The back end of the wall is drywalled. We're going to send the crew, once they've hosed down the exposure and they've got the exposure fire out, we're going to send the crew around the back to remove the drywall to make sure there's no extension into the wall. You know, we also have to keep in mind, did it get up into the attic? What types of insulation do we have? I've dealt with a cellulose fire, insulation fire. I've had a secondary insulation fire from cellulose. I never want to see that again in my career, and I wish that on nobody. So if you've got cellulose, make sure you deal with it appropriately. If you think any fire's got in there, all the cellulose comes out. Don't be afraid to check for extension. Don't be afraid to go that extra spot and remove some stuff. You know, we all try to conserve property, but the insurance company, the lawyers, everyone's not going to thank you if you don't do enough overhaul. So, you know, take some pictures before you wreck everything for fire investigation purposes. As an investigator, I hate going in there and suppression crews have destroyed everything. Let's get those pictures first. Then we do our overhaul, remove bricks, remove siding, whatever we need to do to make sure that fire's out and get that camera in. Natural gas barbecues. You can have that same fire from a natural gas barbecue. You can have it that it's a grease fire, that it burns off the supply hose. Natural gas is lower pressure. It's generally lower pressure off the second stage of the regulator within the home. Most natural gas barbecues have a shutoff right at the nipple on the gas line. If they don't, then go back to the meter. Find the meter and shut the meter off. Just in closing, you know, just because it's a barbecue fire, we poked a lot of fun at it that day when we left our station. We weren't poking so much fun at it when we got halfway down the main street and we see the black smoke in the sky. So, you know, never be too complacent. It's like that automatic alarm you go to, and you go there, you know, 4 times, 5 times, 6 times you go on. Automatic alarm. You get complacent. You don't put on your PPE. You know, you're getting complacent. Don't think that just because you got a barbecue fire, it's going to be a small fire. Don't get complacent. Put on your PPE. Be ready. Think the tactics that we discussed here today, and be prepared to deal with that large barbecue fire, that exposure fire, not just a small fire. So those are my words of advice for dealing with barbecue fires. And thanks for your attention.